next session, we have a speaker from Beyond Identity. Her name is Ms. Jingu, and the title of the session is Making Passwordless a Reality, a Practical Crawl, Walk, Run Roadmap. Okay, please welcome Jingu.
All right. Hi, everybody. So my name is Jing. I lead Secure Customers, or our Customer Identity and Access Management here at Beyond Identity. And I am so excited to talk to all of you about this very practical approach to deploying passkeys. So a lot of the sessions yesterday were about the what of passkeys and the why of passkeys, right? What are passkeys and why are they important? And today, what I'm going to talk about is the how of passkeys. Let's say you got the green light, you got the permission, you have the budget secured. What do you do next? How do you actually make this happen in a way that is secure, comfortable, and frictionless for your users, whoever your users might be? So let's get started. All right, so we start from the beginning. We are now in the crawl stage. This is when rubber meets the road and you are ready to plan the work and work the plan. Great, what's the first step that you need to take? Well, the first step is that you actually need to take inventory of your assets. This is because most companies want to prioritize the user groups, applications, and assets that are most vulnerable. And this is in line with zero trust principles that say, well, when you're looking at securing something, look at what you're most vulnerable around. So take inventory and understand what exactly you're trying to protect first. And there's always going to be an opportunity to expand later, right? Now, the next step is choose your own adventure or your deployment method, but adventure is a little bit more fun, right? There are several key nuances around passkey deployment that you need to consider. For some companies, they want to make passkeys their primary and only method of authentication. They're comfortable with the security assurances that it offers for their users and their applications. Great, good to go. For other companies, perhaps as a way to ease users into passkey adoption, they choose to add passkeys on like a quarterback as a second factor, right? So you have your traditional authentication method, and then you have a passkey come in afterwards. I'm not a sports person, so if that quarterback analogy was not quite right, let me know afterwards, and I'll pick the right role next time. But it's a really popular way for users to get comfortable with passkeys. All right, the second key nuance about passkey deployment is synced versus device-bound. And device-bound passkeys are interesting, right? So synced passkeys are passkeys that are synced across your cloud applications. I'm an Apple girl. My wife loves Android. It's a constant source of tension in the house. But that aside, right? So when I have a passkey on my iPhone, that is synced across all of the devices connected to my iCloud account. In an enterprise scenario, you might not want that to happen. In a high assurance scenario, you also might not want that to happen. So depending on the type of application and user and assets that you're trying to secure, make that decision with fully informed information. And then, of course, if you have other use cases around shared devices, definitely consider that because a platform authenticator might not be the right one for you. OK. Now, once you've done your planning, you get to go to the rollout stage. But don't worry, I have prepared a sample rollout plan, because why reinvent the wheel? So we've worked with over 70 customers to deploy passkeys to their enterprises and consumers, and this is a battle-tested plan. Shout out to all of our customers who've helped us develop this, as well as everyone in the community for their feedback. All right, so you start with the pilot phase. So in the pilot phase, what you're trying to do is you're trying to iron out all of the kinks in your user design and your user journey. This is when you work with users who are OK with a little bit of friction to make sure that they understand what passkeys are, that they're able to adopt passkeys, and that any bugs in your system are squashed before they make it to production. So typically, this starts with design, and then you get your teams involved. We strongly recommend involving your IT and support teams, because if something were to go wrong with your authentication, whether that's for your end users or employees, they're kind of on the front lines, fronting all of those questions as they go. So You piloted it, you've gotten a lot of feedback. Next is a critical stage called user education, because users hate new things. I think this morning Google said something like, we really want the experience to feel familiar to our users, because the newness of things is a friction point that prevents people from wanting to adopt the thing, even if it's good for them. So you want to communicate to your users that the change is coming, when it's coming, why it's coming. But don't worry, you don't have to do this alone. It turns out there are professionals at your company who are trained to talk to users. Who are those people? Well, there's your marketing team, who have all the channels and skill sets to be able to communicate to your users in a very human-friendly way, right? Marketing makes all the words sparkle on the page. Love marketing. And if you're working with employees and you're rolling out passkeys for employees, consider your HR team. They know every team's meeting cadence. They know the communication channels internally. Work with your internal stakeholders to be able to roll this out to your users in a way that's not surprising and shocking to them. All right, now it's the fun part, right? Rubber meets road. OK, you've piloted it. You've gotten so much feedback. You've incorporated the feedback. And you've talked to your users about the change. Now you get to roll this out to your users. You could do it all at once. I know the New Zealand case study, they were pretty aggressive with their timeline. And I'm a fan of that approach if you're very confident in the user journey that you're providing. Some companies choose to deploy this to users in segments. This is a little bit more common because companies are trying to de-risk the rollout, right? Go live in production. Remind users that this is an option for them. Remind them why it matters, that they never have to use a password again. And then you should slowly see your adoption rate increase over time. And I don't want to just give you a rollout plan. I also have some tools to support your planning. OK, so the middle and the left one are FIDO guidelines that the working groups have provided. Those are really good if you want specific feedback about your user experience or about your enterprise deployment. They go into a lot of detail about security considerations, user experience considerations, and some of the choices around deployment models. In fact, the introduction to the enterprise deployment guidelines has a really nice chart that lays out the potential deployment models and pros and cons. Shout out to Dean Sachs from Amazon for leading that effort. The UX guidelines have Figmas that you can actually give to your design team. So they don't have to reinvent the wheel there. And I also want to call out the passkey journey, which is on my right. The passkey journey is a tool developed by Beyond Identity because people came to us and asked, oh, but gee, what does the actual user experience look like? My users are on a bunch of devices, they're on a bunch of browsers. Some of them don't support WebAuthn. I have international users, et cetera. So we built out this tool that you can generate a custom report from. And it doesn't explain the UX in text. It explains it in an interactive Figma that you can actually click through to understand deployment. All right. OK, now, congratulations, you're a toddler. We're walking now. So the walk stage is really about expansion and optimization. If you remember, in the crawl stage, you prioritize your inventory and your assets and the user groups that you want to protect. So when you prioritize, that necessarily means that some of those user groups and assets and resources are going to come second. This is when you can expand passkey coverage more broadly across your organization so that you can reap the benefits of passkeys in a holistic way. And optimization is around 3 key categories of user experience, security, and your actual deployment health. And I will give you some starting metrics that you can use that we've found companies are typically tracking them already, or it's very easy for them to track. You want to optimize because I don't just wake up one day and say, you know what? I think I'm done with self-improvement. I am the best possible person I could be. No more improving. I don't know about you, but I never wake up feeling like that. If you do, good for you. But with passkeys, right, there's always opportunities to improve. There's opportunities to look at your user experience and say, it seems like users are struggling with onboarding. How can we test that to make sure that they can get through it quickly? So usually what we've seen from our research, as well as FIDO's research, is that users are very compelled by the convenience factor of passkeys. In all of the copies we've tested, users respond best to copy like, log in the same way you log into your device, or log in with Touch ID, Face ID, screen lock, etc. Familiar language, and users are comfortable with that, right? And with security analytics, it's really about getting a baseline of what normal looks like so that you can quickly look and assess when something abnormal happens. And of course, I love examples. So I have 2 sample expansion plans. This is like that search or that research that's like, oh, you can build a pathway, but then people are going to cut across the grass either way. Here is kind of 2 paths that people tend to cut across the grass on when it comes to expansion. Typically, a lot of our customers and a lot of deployments start with cloud applications. This is because this is the most frequent place that users authenticate. You see a lot of authentication events there. And attackers are also concentrated on cloud applications. It's also an easy win because you can configure passkeys, typically with your SSO provider or with a vendor. And it's a really quick way to have 80% of the security benefits of your passkeys realized within an enterprise organization. Once you secure your cloud applications, the progression that we see very commonly is then you move on to your endpoints like desktop login, Mac desktop, and Windows desktop login, and then you might go on to secure your additional user directories. The second expansion plan that is really common is expanding across your user groups. Now, the reason this is common is because you can design specific experiences and enable specific features for each of them, for each of these user groups. You might not want to treat your employees the same way you want to treat contractors and customers. You might want additional identity assurances for certain types of scenarios. So, expanding across user groups gives you that opportunity to test the UX at each step. Great. Remember those metrics we talked about? Because nobody wakes up a perfect person and nobody designs authentication perfectly on the first try. Here they are. We want to keep this pretty easy, right? So it's bucketed into 3 categories. You have user success. Are my users actually happy about this? Passkeys are a means to an end. We don't deploy passkeys. I mean, actually, this group of people might do. You might deploy passkeys because they're cool, but usually companies deploy passkeys because there's a user experience benefit. There's reduced cost from password resets or SMS OTP, or there's security benefits of phishing resistance from synced and device-bound passkeys. So you want to measure that. Are your users able to successfully get through enrollment? How fast is it? It should not take any more than 30 seconds. That's a really long time, and that length of time typically indicates a user struggling. You want to look at, for the people who start enrollment, what percentage of them finish. That completion is going to really matter for adoption, and that's a number that you can constantly, iteratively improve. If you measure user satisfaction, definitely include a question in there. Qualitative feedback is really helpful as well. And then, of course, the speed of authentication is something to also look at, because it turns out passkeys can speed up your authentication by like 2x, typically. And the next set of metrics are around security metrics. I won't read each bullet point on there, but the whole notion behind security metrics is so your data doesn't sit in a silo. You want to benchmark what normalcy looks like. So if your users are authenticating at a particular time, at a particular frequency, and suddenly you see a very deviation from that user behavior, something's going on. Either something's failing or you're having an incident. But either way, this is an immediate way for your data to tell you what's going on. And that visibility is critical for remediation and forensics. And then, of course, lastly, we want to measure how we're doing around deployment health. That comes in the form, typically, of user adoption metrics. So what percentage of users have adopted passkeys, and how is that percentage changing over time? With every iteration of UX improvement, you should be able to drive, ultimately, to higher adoption. All right, so now we get to run. So we've crawled, we walked, and now we get to think about what authentication can do for our company. And this is where you really start to leverage that data across your tech stack and use it to quantify the impact that you're driving with this deployment. So Number 1 and number 2 are both about deepening the integration. Number 1 specifically refers to authentication data flowing out of your authentication solution. What I mean by that is you don't want to keep authentication data in a silo. You want authentication data to inform your security incident response, to inform your fraud analytics programs. You want it to inform your threat dashboards, perhaps. And in the consumer scenario, you might want to feed it to your CRM or your customer analytics to understand, am I having an impact on the customer journey? And what is that impact? And this is another sort of cross-collaboration that you can do with various teams so that they too can understand why authentication matters. Something that's really interesting is authentication is often a silent killer of conversions, a silent killer of checkouts. So when, in the retail case, we see a lot of people who come to us and say, when we implemented guest checkout, checkout rate went up by 30%, spelling out X million in revenue for us. With passkeys, it's so much better than guest checkout because it's less friction and you get to have a relationship with the customer. So in terms of scenarios that you can track, you want to just integrate this data out to all of your systems. The second point refers to data flowing into your authentication system the other way. When you have this multi-directional data flow, you can actually make better authentication decisions. Let's say in the enterprise scenario, you have your authentication data connected to an MDM, EDR, SASE, ZTNA. Plug in your alphabet soup of choice there. When you can take your endpoint protection data, for example, and feed it back to your authentication solution, you can start making better policy decisions to understand risk and to mitigate risk before the user is even authenticated. Last but not least, think about yourselves, right? Like, think about the impact of your team. Think about what you can present at your next board meeting, because passkeys are a great stepping stone towards better security and user experience. In fact, it's one of the best, if not the best, stepping stone right now. But the way that you can make that argument, create that narrative, is by showing people, hey, we implemented passkeys, and look at the number of risky users and devices, and look at how that's dropping over time. Or you go to your forensic security team and say, oh, like, the rate of phishing attacks and credential attacks and the rate of success there is much lower because we now have a phishing-resistant authentication solution. Or you can feed it into a better threat dashboard to help you quantify data over time in a holistic way. But the run stage is really about, you've done all of this work. How can you make the data work for you? And how can you showcase the impact of your work across your organization in a way that encourages additional investment in security, user experience, and analytics? And I will leave you guys with this. This is kind of the ideal view of zero trust authentication architecture, where you have authentication data flowing in continuously, feeding out to your other tooling in the security stack, including your EDR, MDM, ZTNA network, and having all of those telemetry data working holistically to create a better enterprise security for you, your consumers, your employee, and all of your assets. So I will end with this. Users are human beings, and the reason that we want to implement passkeys a lot of the time is we want to lift the burden of authentication off of human beings because we live one precious life, and our time is better spent than looking at a URL, trying to figure out if this is a phishing attack, or if I can click this, or if I can't click that. No, it turns out there's technology today that can enable authentication, that can lift all of that burden off of a human being and do it in a scalable, secure way. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what step you're at, as long as you keep moving forwards with this vision of better authentication on the internet that improves digital accessibility and digital experiences for as many people as possible. Because we deserve that. We're human beings. Our time is so precious. Let us have fun instead of authenticating. I'm not born to authenticate. I'm born to use a passkey, though. All right. And with that, that concludes my presentation. There's 5 minutes left. Take any questions?
So we don't have any questions online submitted yet, but maybe opening to the floor. Anyone?
Jing, you mentioned that some of the customers you talk to say that passkeys have enabled sort of even better commerce numbers than guest checkout. Is that like publicly available statistics out there, or just sort of conversations you've had?
It's not publicly available
Okay.
yet, but I promise you I can talk to them and see if we can make a case study out of it.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because that's a big thing for us. We're trying to figure out where we can drive that and how we can, have those conversations
I will
with
say
commerce.
there's a research study by a UX group, but this was a few years ago, that said 46% of consumers have abandoned a transaction because of authentication failure. So while I'll definitely work with our partners to make some of that data public, and we really want to, there's some research out there that does suggest, as a proxy to exact data, that users do tend to drop off and not complete transactions because specifically of authentication. I can share that after the show, maybe include it in the deck.
Hi, Jing. Thanks for your presentation. You mentioned that one of the expansion paths eventually leads to Active Directory.
You don't have to go there if you
Okay,
don't
but
want
what
to.
if I did want to go there? I have my doubts about Microsoft wanting to support passkeys with Active Directory, but is that a path that exists?
It's a potential path that exists for the very brave. And I am not equipped to talk about that in great depth right now. However, I see our literal head of product back there. I can't see him very clearly, but he's there, and I will connect you with him so that you can hash this out. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
It's a path that some of our very brave customers are taking on.
Anyone else with a question? Okay, I think that's it. Jing, any closing thoughts?
No, thanks for your work. Thank you for your time, and I hope you guys have a great show. I will be around. Thank you so much.